the A.R.C challenge, the Awareness, Resilience, and Collaboration Challenge, and we'll end the day with the announcement of the grant winners for that challenge. Now, in the background, the team from Sketchpost, they'll be rendering today's conversation in visual form, and we'll have that right at the end of the proceedings at about 6 o'clock. Now, some house rules, they're going to be posted up there for you to see. Very simply, cameras and mics off for most of you. Please type your questions in the chat box. Raise a hand or use the raise hand function, as it were, if you have any problems or you need to kind of communicate with the team. These proceedings will be broadcasted and they'll be recorded, so just be aware of that. Also, we ask you to be, and I think this is probably doesn't have to be stated, but be respectful, be kind to each other, and use the hashtags. If you're on social media and you want to kind of disseminate what we're talking about, these are the hashtags that you can use for today. So, so that is basically the rundown for the afternoon, taking us from 4:30 up to 6 p.m. Like to invite His Excellency first, Charles Hay, who is the British High Commissioner to Malaysia, to open the forum. Just to note, the UK will be hosting the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference on the Parties, COP26 as it's called, in Glasgow in early November 2021. I'd like to invite His Excellency to make his opening remarks.
Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity. And let me first start by thanking the British Council and everybody else involved in organising this event for bringing us together to discuss what I think is probably the most critically important issue facing us today. That's not to dismiss the importance of COVID, but COVID will, I hope, be a relatively short-lived phenomenon, but the issue of climate change is one that has been with us and will be with us for a long time. Global policymakers have been struggling with the issue for years. When I think back in my own career, I first started to be involved in climate change issues as far back as 2003. And a very great deal has been done over the years, and yet we seem very far from a solution. I'm really glad that we're looking at the problem today through the prism of youth. As I know, as the father of two teenage girls, increasingly it's the young that are demanding urgent action. And who criticise those in positions of power for failing to take sufficient action to save the planet from further harm. Now, I get criticised for a lot of things in my household, but I happen to think that on this point, they're actually right, because climate change is already happening. And as its impact intensifies over time, it's the children and young people of today who are going to face the worst effects. And as we look across Asia, and of course, including Malaysia, we're already facing the impacts of destructive and extreme weather events, and the frequency of these events is set to accelerate in the years ahead. The challenges are enormous, and these challenges are multiplied for the most vulnerable communities, who are suffering now, of course, the double burden of COVID-19 and the impacts, the growing impacts of climate change. And here in Malaysia, the B40 are poor and marginalised and need support. And it's been very heartening to see that many non-state actors, including NGOs and youth groups, have been helping them. But as we experience a third wave of COVID-19 and the further restrictions that affect all communities, those problems are multiplying. And I think it's important to remember, as a point of optimism, that as countries recover from this pandemic, there is an opportunity for us to build back better, is the term that people are using. What does that mean? That means building, creating a more sustainable economy and laying the foundations for sustainable and inclusive growth. Recent polls show that some 2/3 of people agree that we now have a climate emergency. And I think we can all see now clearly that collective international effort is crucial. Ladies and gentlemen, whether it's through education, technology, the arts, sciences, or law, young people far and wide are using their skills and their wisdom to speak up for climate action. Tackling climate change cannot just be the role of scientists and researchers, and cannot just be the strategic priority of governments and policymakers or the economic consideration of corporate players. As I said, we're all affected by the impact of climate change, and we all have a role to play in tackling it. And so I think this discussion today with young people from the arts, education, science and cultural sectors representing diverse communities from both Malaysia and the UK is important because it's our joint responsibility. We all have a role to support this agenda through our respective areas, and especially because young people are the hope of this generation in our collective effort to tackle climate change. As you've already heard, the UK is going to host the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP26, in Glasgow in November this year. This conference will be the largest international climate change summit the UK has ever hosted. If the COVID situation allows, we'll bring together thousands of delegates, including heads of state, climate experts and campaigners, and we want to agree on coordinated action to tackle climate change. COP26 isn't just one event. It's going to be supported by a build-up events program hosted by Italy, which is going to include a major youth event and a pre-COP summit in September. And every country has its role to play. As we head towards COP26, the UK, for example, has set out a plan to reduce our emissions by at least 68% compared to 1990 levels over the course of this decade. Other countries and businesses are also setting out ambitious plans. And it's very striking how many countries have now set a target of achieving net zero emissions, including China, Japan and South Korea. And the call for climate action in Malaysia is growing too. Taking the carbon out of our economies is not only good for the climate, it's also better economic value. Solar and wind power now is not just cleaner and healthier, it is now almost always cheaper than coal or gas-fired power. Apart from catastrophic weather events, we're also seeing a parallel loss of habitat, of forests and plant and animal species of all kinds. In the UK, we're taking action on this. We've pledged to protect 30% of our land surface, 30% of our marine surface to create protected areas. And Malaysia, of course, has taken steps too. I think it was as far back as the Rio summit in the 1990s, Malaysia pledged to maintain at least 50% forest cover. Now that's all very positive, but as climate advocates, we must go further when it comes to biodiversity. Of course, we need really hard-edged targets for the preservation of species and wildlife and forests, but we also need to work on the rewilding of our planet in a way that, for example, Sir David Attenborough has suggested. Obviously, we need to focus on climate change, cutting carbon emissions, but we need to achieve a real balance with our planet through understanding and protecting our biodiversity. And I would urge anybody interested in looking into this any further to look at the report that's just been released by Professor Paresh Gupta on the economic importance of biodiversity. Often people have tried to put an economic value on our nature, with not much success. But I think what this report shows is the fundamental importance of protecting our natural habitat to our entire economic way of life. Very often economists consider the environment and the natural habitat as a sort of afterthought, but they really need to be thinking about it in a very integrated way as we think about our economic position. We also need to think about the concept of collective access to these cultural rights without discrimination. We need to think about how we can help young people to take action to protect the future of our planet, including these cultural rights. And I think it's very important in this to encourage the hearing of the voices of youth, including setting up platforms to raise awareness and increasing youth participation. And I think this is a very important example of doing exactly that. The A.R.C. Challenge Malaysia, as I think you all know, A.R.C, Awareness, Resilience and Collaboration. It's a very important initiative run by the British Council in the run-up to COP26. And what I really like about this forum is it brings together a diverse panel of youth leaders from the arts, science and education from both of our countries to think about how we can build a more sustainable future and to explore how youth can make a difference and how youth can influence existing political, economic and social models. Another highlight of today's session, as you just heard, is the announcement of the successful applicants for the A.R.C Challenge Malaysia grant. And that's 3 seed funding grants of up to £10,000 each to kickstart joint responses to the Shared Climate Change Challenge. And that's for young people aged 18 to 35. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing who the winners of that are and to hearing their plans in due course. And I think the fact that so many people are gathered together today virtually attests to the passion we have and the importance we all place on climate change issues. And I look forward to the discussions this afternoon, and I hope this will yield some important ideas driven by the wisdom of experts and the aspirations of the young, so that we can feed those into how we collectively consider how we can exchange knowledge and share innovative practices to tackle climate change in this crucial year for the benefit of all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Charles, and for also kind of putting into the conversation a host of new ideas that we'll have to take up, not just this afternoon, but for the foreseeable future. Wilding the planet, collective efforts, collective access. These are really important concepts that we need to grapple with. Just a quick note, in the audience, most of you are between the ages of 26 and 35, 36-year-olds to 45-year-olds being the second largest demographic in this audience. You can't see each other, but know that you're there. And next up, we have Florence Lambert. She's the head of the Arts and Creative Industries Division of the British Council, and she'll be making her opening remarks. Florence.
Thank you, Sharaad, and thank you, Charles, for your intervention. And I would like to thank all our guests today and our panelists for joining us in this event. And I also would like to thank the audience. So my intervention will be short, hopefully, and I just want to contextualize a little bit climate change and cultural rights here. So good morning, good afternoon. Today, globally, the youth recognize climate change as its main challenge. While climate change has been well identified as a human rights crisis, the cultural rights dimension is overlooked. The British Council recognizes this gap and is keen to provide a platform to create awareness, resilience, and collaboration against climate change. According to the United Nations, cultural rights relate to a broad range of issues such as expression and creation of art, information and communication, language, identity and belonging to multiple, diverse and changing communities of shared cultural values, development of specific world visions and the pursuit of specific ways of life, education and training, access, contribution and participation in cultural life and the conduct of cultural practices, and access to and enjoyment of heritage in all its forms. All human rights are affected by climate change, but cultural rights even more so, as they could simply disappear in some cases. Many islanders across the world already face the drowning of their nations. Impacts and risks caused by climate change on our cultural rights are not understood, mapped, or advocated for enough. The global pandemic of COVID-19 is the priority for governments, media, and the global population. But the climate emergency continues to be the largest challenge the youth faces today. So what is at stake? Here are some of the most obvious risks. The loss of tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Entire people's cultural achievement could be wiped out. Losses are not only physical, but also economic, social, and cultural. Climate change is also a threat multiplier by fueling poverty, political instability, and resource conflict in which heritage destruction may take place. Cultural appetite and cultural injustice. Those who have contributed the least to climate change stand losing the most. Cultural diversity and cultural survival. Climate displacement threatens cultural survivals and traditional livelihoods. Traditional knowledge and ways of life, including the know-how and techniques needed to respond to such a change. Cultural rights of women in their ability to participate in cultural life and access educational opportunities. And finally, impact on cultural rights of indigenous people. Because indigenous people cultures are so connected to the land and their ecosystems, they will particularly be affected by the impacts of climate change. It is critical that we start listening, respecting, and learning from those who have sustained their lands and ways of life for centuries. All of us will be impacted, but the impacts will hit people and places disproportionately, posing particular threats to the rights and cultures of coastal populations, populations of low-lying island states, indigenous people, rural people, women, people with disabilities, and those living in poverty and other marginalized communities. It is also important to note that climate change magnifies existing gender inequalities between girls and boys. Yet, women are catalysts for climate change activism and play a leading role in creating culture and driving new ways of life to adapt to the climate crisis. Climate change is the most significant intergenerational equity issue of our time. Youth, mankind's future, must fully participate in shaping climate policy now. The response needs to be concerted and global, but also address diversity, specific impacts, actors, and opportunities. Taking into account historical emissions, some nations are disproportionately responsible for the climate crisis. Developed states must reduce emissions more rapidly and assist developing states. Culture and cultural rights are not only casualties of climate change. They're also part of the solution. They are tools for climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. Arts and culture can bring resilience, help humanity explore the different scenarios, create awareness, educate, and mobilize activism. Climate change cannot be addressed exclusively through technical, technological, or scientific solution. A holistic approach must include human beliefs, value, and behavior. The role of the cultural sector is as important as science and technology. Art and culture can bridge the gap between science, policy, civic action. They provide a space for collective reflection, debate, and action against climate change. So to conclude, culture and cultural rights are casualties in the climate change emergency, but also useful tools to shape a holistic response. They enable better policy choices and outcomes. All environmental policies should take the cultural dimension into consideration. We also need to protect the conditions that will allow for access, participation, and contribution to culture and its practice without discrimination. We must protect cultural heritage and cultural rights together with our environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence. Florence Lambert, Head of the Arts and Creative Industries Division of the British Council. Just a quick check on time. We're running a little late, but just to note also, those of you in the audience, half of you apparently are in climate change related work. So you probably know a lot of this stuff, and a large number of you are actually from science and engineering and education. So that's who's in the room at this point in time. I'd like to invite two other people into the room who are going to be kind of leading the first part, the first forum, as it were, of today's this afternoon. And I won't go into a long read of their CVs because we actually have only 20 minutes, perhaps a little less, to hear from them, as well as have questions from you, the audience. So let's get straight to it. We have first off Professor Dr. Joy Jacqueline Pereira. She's a Principal Research Fellow at the Disaster Prevention Research Initiative at Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, and she will help start off, give us the context in which we're having this conversation, that is the response to climate change, both in Malaysia and the UK. Joy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd just like to start by expressing my gratitude to the British Council for inviting me. Can I have the first slide, please? As a scientist, we just totally rely on slides. It's our security blanket, if you will. And I'm just proud to be able to share some highlights from the work of the IPCC here. Many of you are familiar with this, so please consider this a refresher. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to remind you on the route to apathy here, based on the science of climate change, on the impacts of global warming of 1.5 degrees to 2 compared to 2 degrees. In a 1.5 degree world, we'll expect less extreme weather. Sea level rise will be lower, about 10 centimeters, with 10 million fewer people exposed. There'll be lower impact on biodiversity and species, smaller reductions in food production, and half the people will be exposed to water shortages, and we'll have a lower impact on fisheries and livelihood. Whilst 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees is just very tiny, yeah? A 0.5 degree difference, the implication is to several 100 million souls in worldwide. So tropical Southeast Asia is projected to experience the largest impact on economic growth. Next slide, please. So what is tropical Southeast Asia? Is essentially ASEAN, and my review of the whether ASEAN is ready for this 1.5 world based on government reports indicates that with respect to extreme weather, we have a low to medium level of readiness for extreme rainfall and heat. This, and compared to in most of the region, there's a major risk of lung cancer. New research is coming out that if you use increase renewable energy and invest in your healthcare, you will most likely have reduction in lung cancer prevalence. Next slide, please. And with respect to responding to this, my colleague from Cambridge, Professor Lord Julian Hunt, and we mobilized 10 organizations from Malaysia and 6 organizations from the UK under the Innovate UK Mike Newton Unku Omar Fund, and to benefit the City Hall of Kuala Lumpur, where the mayor himself has a big buy-in, where we look downscaled for the city of Kuala Lumpur, meteorological parameters, geophysical hazard, atmospheric hazards, and to this multi-hazard platform, which you see the picture, the physical console is there. Essentially, it's a system that forecasts rainfall, and thanks to the wonderful work of the meteorology department in Malaysia, we have street level forecasts of rainfall, temperature, humidity, landslide areas, flood areas. So all these are important information that youth and the community should have access to, so that you can take actions that are organic. Next slide, please. So what can youth do? You can use the disaster management cycle as an entry point, bringing together all the major global frameworks, the Sendai framework, the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and you can look at this management cycle, and you would look at disaster recovery as the way to actually move towards prevention and mitigation. So post-COVID-19 is a great opportunity for us to reset better. This is in line with the Sendai framework's Build Back Better, and the role of youth here is to push the learnings from previous resets in the First World War and the Second World War, where structural changes were supported and centered on human well-being and dignity. This is well in line with our discussion here. Youths have this energy to promote just and ethical transformation, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, to build resilience within your communities, to address risks both in the short and the long term. And for this, you need to push for open access information in the region, particularly in Malaysia as well. And you have this capacity to enhance digital transformation and actively participate in enhancing this through, and as well as other land-based solutions and ecosystem rehabilitation. So the youths are here today. I thank the organizers for this opportunity to speak to you. I would say to you, this is your world. Yeah? Youths, be the driver of your change. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Joy. Joy Pereira there from Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Now we'll just go to Alison Tickell. She's director of Julie's Bicycle, which is a London-based charity supporting creative communities to act on climate change and environmental sustainability. Alison, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And to everybody who's here, I'm really glad to be here with you in this strange context, because of course we've heard the climate and ecological emergency needs us all to work quickly, collaboratively, with focus and with generosity, because of course we know there's no time to lose. So obviously the pandemic has shockingly accelerated the inevitable Great Reckoning with a deeply broken economic system, which in turn is breaking the natural systems that provide such a unique and wonderful place for us all. So getting to grips with this emergency, understanding how to implement radical change is frankly impossible to do, maintaining business as usual. We all know this. Thinking is now an imperative. Slide, please. So the company that I work with, Julie's Bicycle, it's a super company of about 15 mainly good women and some great men too. We've been exploring these ideas since we started 14 or so years ago. The idea is founded on two basic ideas. One, that the climate crisis is in fact a cultural crisis. And two, that we can't wait for the existing system, the status quo, to sort this out for us simply because it can't. It brought us here. And that means a step change in cultural thinking, in policy, investment, in training, in tools, in who gets to speak about what, where, and to whom. This is fundamentally about cultural rights. We need a unifying and mobilizing international approach that embeds sustainability and justice into the fabric of the arts. Julie's Bicycle was founded 13 years ago by the UK music industry, and we now work right across the cultural sector internationally with hundreds of amazing organisations and artists, helping them to make their works more sustainable and learning prodigiously ourselves through that great experience. Huge companionship. Slide 3, please. So what might this look like? Well, we have all the key frameworks into which national and international targets sit. We have the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, ideas around a circular economy where waste is abolished, a new emerging Green Deal in many countries, and a big push, as we heard from Charles, on restoring wildlife and nature. These four big themes are an immediate, rapid and urgent reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to net zero, and restoring and protecting our biodiversity and our wildlife. This is Julie's Bicycle's first objective, that the arts and culture really drive this change. The second, that then there's a world without waste, regenerative ideas that move away from excessive consumption. And finally, there is championing justice in all its forms. So Julie's Bicycle's first two goals, reducing our impacts and restoring nature, have been hugely boosted in 2012 by our National Arts Council England, next slide please, making environmental reporting a requirement in order to get funding for 800 or so of the main organisations that Arts Council England funds. That was a long time ago. Cultural policy really does need to catch up with this, not just in the UK, but in cities, in municipalities, in cultural policy all over the world. We really need to put environmental thinking at the very heart of our work. This was a bold policy move, which actually has made a huge difference to the arts in the UK. New ideas, new commissions, a very literate a literate sector that understands how to work in this new world. Next slide, please. Mobilizing the sector, Julie's Bicycle's third goal, is a huge priority as we head into the next year, and I'll talk about that leadership in a little bit. Next slide, please. The final goal, our goal, is around justice, and it is perhaps the most important. It's where cultural rights really sits, because I've come to realise that without justice as our guide, we are lost. The origins of the climate crisis are in large part found in a prevailing attitude of human supremacy often celebrated in supremacist culture over all other cultures and all other life forms. This, as we know, has fostered this enduringly uneven global growth model, which has dispossessed thousands, millions of people of land, livelihoods and culture. And of course, it's also destroying the natural world. The story of climate change is not found in the ice caps. It lies in the buried histories of human conquest anchored in cultural values that believe happiness will come if we consume enough and if we own enough. This is why the climate crisis is fundamentally a cultural crisis. Next slide, please. During the life of Julie's bicycle, this incredible new ecology of creative climate practice has been emerging all over the world. New leadership, often led by young people, that is fresh, purposeful, committed, and many of you might recognise yourselves here. Next slide, please. We have identified there are 7 key trends, 7 key areas of new creative practice that cherish our planet. We found it in work, artwork, curation, exhibitions, fantastic new creative content that's breathing its new life into the world. We found it in people, in campaigns, in activism. Again, new creative climate activism that is speaking to power, speaking to truth in a new campaigning and focused way. We found it in organisations, in leadership, where organisations are beginning to embody a new relationship to Mother Earth and to the idea of the arts and culture. What do they embody? What new values are they revealing in the way that they work? We found it in makers, social and material designers and innovators, so many rooted in the creative community, rethinking, redesigning, not just how we make the world, but how we exist within it. We found it in influencers, in policymakers and in funders. So much needs to be done around this, but there are some fantastic ideas, some fantastic new policies shaping the context in which we all work. We found it in 2 key new characteristics that is driving new culture. One is the idea of collaboration, putting collaboration at the heart of our work and superseding the old notion of competition, which has been so corrosive. And the second is, of course, pathfinding, superseding the status quo, a new creative ecology which maps directly across to these new frameworks around nature, net zero that we need to work to. We call this mobilisation creative climate leadership and creative climate action. And we've co-created programmes on creative climate leadership with inspiring partners across the world. Next slide, please. But let's not lose the urgency. This opportunity to create this flourishing world is a 4.5 billion year moment that we must meet. Next slide, please. Everywhere, renewal is bubbling up and gathering momentum. Next slide, please. We've seen enormous change. Up until very recently, the idea of countries committing to net zero, as Charles pointed out, was very rare. You have an infinite capacity for invention, energy for change. I wish I was younger. And sadly, I'm nearly 60. And I wish I was half my age, because in this movement, everything matters. All the small actions and connections that bind you to one another and bind us to Mother Earth, speaking to cultural values that cherish and care. Artists, younger people have always activated social change. And this year, in the run-up to the next climate talks, a year from now, we have this incredible opportunity to transform a cultural economy that's no longer fit for purpose into an ecology that is equitable, collaborative, resilient and restorative. Now, that is our heritage. That is our collective cultural right. Thank you. Next slide.
Oh, thank you, Alison. That was brilliant. Both you and Joy helped really put the context of the conversations we're going to have in the next panel together. Joy, sort of highlighting the scale of the impact that we're going to be looking at just the enormity of the problem. And Alison, thank you also for kind of nailing the calling out the elephant in the room, the question of culture, our desires to consume the world in particular ways that are now coming back to haunt us. We don't have time for questions for both Alison and Joy at this point, but they'll still be with us through the next panel. So we can leave questions for them, and you can write your questions down in the chat function, and we'll put that to them at the end of the next panel. So the second panel that we're having today kind of brings together all these youth voices and basically posing them the question of the kind of future they want and how they see themselves and their investment in making that future real. So we have 5 people joining us today. Toza Cheese, sorry, she's with the Malaysian Youth Delegation, because the Malaysian Youth Delegation follows the COP process. Sharaad, an artist and indigenous rights activist, part of the Thermuan community. Eliza Collins, who works on sustainable fashion and materials design. Wendy Theo, who's with Borneo Laboratory, and athlete Don Perez with Reef Check Malaysia. All of them, I'm going to invite them to make an intervention, maybe 5 minutes or so, telling us a little bit about what they do and the kind of future they want to see. So can I begin with you, Zachi?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sharaad. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you so much for attending the session. So as to what I do, first of all, I initially I was the co-founder of Ecology UN, which is essentially an environmental focal student association in the Faculty of Law in Universiti of Malaya. Currently, I'm not part of the board anymore, so for my work in 2020 as well as this year, I'm more focused with my work in the Malaysian Youth Delegation. So it is as introduced by Mr. Sharaad, it is a environmental, non-governmental organization. So we focus more on environmental advocacy and educating people about what we can do from individually, and also we create engagements with the government. And apart from that, on a personal capacity, I'm a law student. So one of my subjects, I'm actually writing a paper in focusing on expanding the legal standing in terms of environmental disputes within Malaysia. So this is generally the things that I'm currently working on. I'm hoping to do more. As to addressing the question, what kind of future I envision, speaking from a very legalistic perspective, I would say that we have very good laws within Malaysia, but the enforcement is not done well enough in terms of how actions are taken against big corporations to hold them accountable for environmental pollution. For instance, recently there has been a lot of river pollution in the state of Selangor, and there has been court cases that has been brought forward, but in terms of the fine that has been imposed upon those companies, a very measly sum that does not account for the amount of damage they have done to the livelihood of the people. So I think that is one point I wish to highlight, and I hope that I would be able to bring forward with my work and also further improve in terms of the law enforcement on the area of environmental law. And I think what keeps me moving forward in the work of environmental law is I believe that this is what we owe to our current generation as well as the future generation to safeguard the rights of the people as well as the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zachi. Also in the room, we have Sharaad Kuttan. She's a well-known artist and indigenous rights activist, the heart of the most recent storm that we have over the North Kuala Langat Forest Reserve. Sharaad?
Right. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to British Council for having me today. And as an indigenous artist, as an indigenous people of Malaysia, I think the work that we done as indigenous people, we are the protector of the rainforest. I truly believe in that because our livelihood, our lifestyle, our culture based on the environment that we live on, and also we need the environment as a as a cultural value for us, and also as our identity. Without forests, for us, it's like we're losing without our identity. So to answer that question, why do you think future look like? I think the future look like is I think by the work that I'm doing now, I'm try the best I can to do community engagement program through art workshop with the community, especially to indigenous community, by empower them with the cultural right and also but human right and indigenous right, and in where they have knowledge how to protect themselves against encroachments in the future, as well as empower them through the knowledge about our existing law that's protecting the rainforest as well as protecting indigenous people, because knowledge is very powerful. And I think unfortunately in Malaysia, indigenous people are honestly still considered as a marginalized community. I think that's another things that we need to address and also try to take a look. I think use as an answer to fill the gap. I think in my work also I try to mentoring so many community in the schools to make sure that to be ready for the future in cases the encroachment happen, because there's so many encroachment happen will end up they will lose their jungle. I mean the Malaysian jungle means the jungle more likely will be locked by the irresponsible company, irresponsible authority, and then often the indigenous people become a victim of the loss of biodiversity. I think I answered the bomb question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacques. You're brilliant as always. Yeah, and kind of underscoring really how the Indigenous community is the front lines of this battle that we have. Eliza Collins, she works on sustainable fashion and materials design. Eliza, could you share your thoughts with us?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real honor to speak amongst these amazing panelists. So I want to highlight that the future that I want to see is where people are much more aware of their impacts, and feel empowered to make choices, better choices. My work is about raising awareness for alternative methods and processes, systems and materials, and to look at our actions through a different lens. I do this to challenge the comfort we find ourselves in, but also to present ready and existing solutions which will only enhance the user experience through integration. For example, a project that I'm working at the moment with Wendy, another panelist for the British Council Malaysia, Collections Through Culture, on the narratives of soil, which has a subheading, which is the potentials of mud. And the aim is to really enlighten people to how versatile and untapped this material is in particular, and how in its many applications it can be recycled directly to the land. We're drawing on bringing ancient techniques back into the forefront, but also exploring some really fascinating emerging technologies with this material, which can use mud and, as a twist, what lives within the mud as a pivotal component. Another one of my projects I'd like to draw on, which I explored last year, was a series of conversations which presented different viewpoints of how people perceive the non-human world. And this really opened my eyes to the complex challenges we face in our thinking and our fears before we can feel that we are really able to understand and work with nature. I'm always aiming to discover the questions that we need to be asking through my making and conversations and deep research into all the materials I use in my work. As you mentioned, I come from a fashion background, and we all know the huge negative impact this industry has had on the planet. And the knowledge I gained from my work in this industry has really driven me forward in my practice today. And I would like to finish on the fact that modern design has been the driving force for many of the issues that we face today. Therefore, I see it as my duty to continue my practice with more awareness than designers before me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eliza, for that. And now we call Wendy Theo, your partner in that project you've just mentioned. Wendy Theo is with Borneo Laboratory. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. Could you tell us? Okay, we can hear you still. Okay, wonderful. There you are. Okay, Wendy, tell us what we should see. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So I'm Wendy Theo, architect and curator of Borneo Lab, a creative agency and cultural platform based in Borneo, Malaysia. Over the past few years, we were fortunate enough to be engaged by some of the really visionary and courageous client or collaborator to work on a series of change-making projects across Asia in the area of local craftsmanship, engagement, upcycling waste, and creative ecosystem building or the destination making. So if you're interested to find out more about our work, feel free to check out our work in our website, borneoartcollective.org. So during this pandemic time, we have been exploring how could we learn and explore differently with our thematic reading club carried out online during the first lockdown. Because of it, this used to be really intimate group, grew into a crowd of 28. This also enabled us to share and talk to some of the change makers across the globe. And in the following, I was asked to share some of the points that we derived from our reading club discussion. So during this reading club, the book, The Uninhabitable Earth, suggests we are witnessing the rise of the pandemic age, in which the wildfire, flooding, lightning strike will fuel one another and lead to the loss of habitat, virus mutation, and eventually pandemic. Along with the political refugee, we will also witness a large surge in the climate refugee and pandemic refugee. Climate refugee tends to be those who hold lower position in the climate caste system, which associate with the conversation of environmental justice. But equally, we will also see that the small self-sustained community are more likely to survive than those big outsourcing reliance community of the superstates. Those through the sharing skill and resources. Our current climatic narrative has yet to be a global one. We are faced either with the overly optimistic view which see planetary migration as the ultimate path, or else with the climate nihilism which weaponize climate change by making it political. We can foresee the number of climate refugees surging beyond the political refugee in the near future, but we're still not good at imagining ourselves becoming one. Currently, with those undocumented boat parked near to our sea border, we still refer them as the illegal immigrants or intruder or refugee. Perhaps the real question is not how should we be dealing with them, but how we want to be treated. That could be us. To date, we witnesses art council around the world restructuring their funding policy toward art as an emergency package to sustain artists through pandemic. In return, artists are encouraged to digitize their work and make their work accessible online. When the metric of success in art is reduced to click, like, and share, it is perhaps valid to question how and what kind of art produced nowadays can truly participate or disrupt the societal narrative in a meaningful way. In our last reading club section, The Role of Art, we review how some ambitious artistic endeavor change our mass consciousness over our ecological sphere and social sphere through the art intervention. From there, we review argument on the mission of art from various perspectives. Should art be a pleasure in the sense of visual aesthetic, a contextually meaningful correspondence, or a safe havens of transdisciplinary experimentation? It is the time we need to recalibrate the mission of art and creativity. Can we safeguard the symbiosis of humanity and nature? Can we be creative with our solution? Can we still win when we are the kinder version of our kind? Over the last year, it is evident that the impact brought by the pandemic has shaken our once globalized economy and social equity in a massive way. A lot of us seems to think that we are facing an ecological, social, or political challenge, but I think the real crisis we have been facing all this while is the moral crisis. Meanwhile, we are seeing the irreversible damage happen to our natural habitat. It is because all this while we have been excluding the natural environment from our moral equation until they react. There will be a generation of us exposed to the norm that people are willing to trade in their safety with money, or we prioritize the travel with business purpose over other purpose, such as education, medical, or cultural, etc. So, or we allow people to travel from certain country with better governance or control over this crisis? Most of these questions may not be new, but this probably is the first time in history we collectively agree upon the common agreement and arrangement and also the priority. These unprecedented moral decisions we have collectively made, either out of fear or love, they are more likely to stay as a benchmark and precedence for our future generation. Moral crisis, it is most likely the crisis that will be lasting, and it will take more time to rebuild the damage it has caused to our humanity. So from here, we know that we have a lot to do and undo. That's it.
Wow, Wendy, very provocative thoughts there. Which we'll take up in the Q&A. And so I'd like to encourage everybody, there's over 100 of you in the audience, many of you from a technical background, educational background, please, send your questions in so we can take this conversation further. We have one more panelist to hear from, athlete Don Perez. He's with the Reef Check Malaysia. Don, if you could give us your sense of what is happening and what you want to see the world be like in your future and how you're going to help take it there.
Hello guys, Don over here from Reef Check Malaysia. First I want to say thank you to British Council for being invited, being part of this forum, and these wonderful panelists from various backgrounds. Basically, it's really inspiring to hear your stories, really. Actually, I was introduced to British Council, especially after I joined the FameLab Science Communication Competition. I've been joining since 2017, and then when I joined again in 2020, that's where I get to represent Malaysia to the international stage. So science communication have always been my thing because it seems that I can't stop talking, but I wanted to speak with valid points and to convince people to act on something. And it just seemed that environmental and conservation is my niche. So now that I'm working with Reef Check Malaysia, which is more of a marine conservation and marine park management organization, right? So it is where I have to put my words into action. So for Reef Check Malaysia is an organization that focuses more on, as I say, on marine conservation, marine park management, and so on. So we have been working in Pulau Mantanan in Sabah, Pulau Tioman. We have also established our presence currently now immersing Johor for Johor Islands and so on. But along the way, we have realized that we have communities, local islanders who relies on the resources, natural resources, that the same one we're trying to conserve and protect. So we've realized that it's not fair, right, to detach this community from the same livelihood natural resource that they relies on, which is why along the way we have introduced and even implemented ways of how community could be part of the marine resource management and do their role and empower them, train them how they could be part of the management for marine park resources and also to address some of the issues as well in terms of marine debris and so on. So currently the work that I'm involved right now here in Mersing is more to sustainable tourism because we realize that Mersing is some of the destination that, to go to Tioman Island and some of the islands in Johor. And of course, due to COVID, we're seeing a lot of the destination and even tourism sectors are going down at the moment. So, but also at the same time, internationally, we're seeing a growing trend towards sustainable tourism, which is what we are working on towards, and giving out the message that just because we're conserving the environment doesn't mean we're compromising the economic and our social needs. There is a way where businesses can strive, social and quality of life could strive along as we conserve the environment. So for the long term, to answer the question, what we envision for the youth regarding climate change is that I believe that the youth currently are well exposed. Right? We know what's going on. We could see with the social media making it so much easier to help us to be exposed to some of the things that's happening, especially climate change and environmental issues. So the way I envision is that youth in the future would realize that to do our role and to be an impact, positive impact does not mean you have to be a conservationist, doesn't mean you have to be a scientist, doesn't mean you have to be an environmental consultant. You can basically be a marketing designer, a sales who promotes sustainability, who talks about conservation, who basically just share someone that, hey, you don't, it's not necessary to be from a scientific background. You could just simply talk about it, support your local organization who's working towards environmental protection, who is fighting against deforestation, right? Who's helping to support communities who's trying to strive with sustainable livelihood and so on. Where conservation and climate change issue could be addressed beyond the niche of people who's working in the field, but everyone could play a huge role as well from different backgrounds.
Okay, Don, thank you so much. That gives us about half an hour for the Q&A. And just to remind everybody that Joy and Alison are still in the room, and you did send, I'm referring here to the audience, you did send questions in prior to today's proceedings. So I have those in hand, but I'd like to maybe get maybe Joy or Alison to respond to what you just heard, what the 5 panelists have shared with us, whether it's about better enforcement or Indigenous communities being on the front lines, working for practical solutions, and also being good communicators. I'd like to ask Alison, if you're still in the room with us, Alison, do you have a response to some things that have been said? Thank you.
Well, I think if anything needs to be said, it's that we've just heard some examples of this incredible new creative practice, right from which is very multidimensional. What is incredible to hear and be inspired by is the ingenuity, the range, and also I love that word that I think Wendy was using, this idea of a moral compass, that actually this is about reframing what we do, why we do it, and how we do it to meet this moment in a completely different way. This is the kind of transformation that actually needs to embed itself across all all society, our whole economy. And the only thing I've really got to say is that it was really exciting, some fantastic, radical, transformative, challenging ideas. This is the new cultural promise that we need to, all of us need to respond to, reinforce and celebrate.
Thank you, Alison. Joy, if you could respond. In fact, there are 2 very scientific and technical questions, Joy, that you have gotten. One has to do with the agricultural sector in Malaysia. And an example is rice straw burning at harvest time of paddy, and also the question of carbon pricing. And I don't know if we can go to all those issues, might take a little too much time, but your sense of how do you combine the kind of scientific outlook that you have, the kind of work that you're doing on monitoring the environment, with the kinds of goals that you hear articulated on the panel today?
Yeah, thank you, Sharaad. I think I'd just like to congratulate the youth. I'm so optimistic for the future. I can see this group making a tremendous change, and nothing that was said by the group of youth is not in harmony. Everything they say is in harmony with the kind of work that we do. And I'd just like to draw on what Dawn said. You hit the nail right on the, correctly pointed out that you don't have to be a scientist or you don't have to have specialization. Anybody can make a change, and that transformation comes from all of you. And in responding to those aspects of carbon market, I don't think our Malaysia is moving towards that, but we are doing a lot of things like payment for ecosystem services is coming into play. And we know things like carbon tax. People are proposing things like carbon tax. So that I think is going to be more relevant in really transforming the private sector and bringing real change. But our youth, I can see you make that difference in transforming our world. Please don't stop. Thank you, Sharaad.
Okay, so Devaseno Doraraj, you asked the question about agriculture. Perhaps at some point you can engage Joy on that question more deeply. But so let me begin with a question that intrigues me, and I want to ask Zachi to weigh in on this, because we see today in Malaysia, who wields real power. And recently we had a landmark case on planning governance. This was won in the courts. I wonder if the courts are an avenue for activism in Malaysia in order to actually change the power dynamics we have. Say, for instance, in one of the things that Shak champions, the prevention of degazetting of the North Kuala Langat Forest Reserve. Could the courts be a way that you can actually beat the big developers and the big money that's shaping the landscape in detrimental ways?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. That's actually very related to the paper I'm working with, so I'm very excited to answer this. So in terms of the court decision, of course, people who are environmentalists actually, we very much welcome it because it is a very liberative approach to take for the courts, because the courts back then, they have been taking a more of a conservative approach to which certain decisions cannot be passed, cannot be heard within courts, only merely because certain people who bring forth the application does not have the legal standing, whereby basically the court says that you are not a person of interest towards the case, therefore you cannot bring forward. So this is actually a very problematic thing, because essentially all of us should be entitled to the right of environment. But due to administrative issues, that has been a hurdle, as mentioned by Shak just now, in terms of degazetting the forest. I think in terms of that, within our federal constitution, we actually have articles that allow the federal government to reserve a certain part of the land so that we do not, certain part of land so that the forest is preserved for the purpose of conservation of the environment. But this approach is not really taken by the federal government, disappointingly. And there has been many cases of indigenous lands and forests being degazetted. And I think the problem is a matter of urgency, that this issue is not viewed as urgent by our government. It's not urgent enough. I'm sure they're doing some measures, but I think the problematic thing is that people are not seeing the problem of environment as a very urgent matter, because one of the reasons, probably because Malaysia is still a developing country, so there are also issues on economy whereby we wish to develop our country further. But what I want to say is that it is important to remember that just because we promote to conserve the environment doesn't mean we encourage the economy to come to a halt. What we wish to promote is true sustainable development, and it is important to remember that the environment also affects the economy and every other field around it. So it's very important to bear in mind that, as mentioned by Don, everyone has a role to play. Everyone has a role in this. It is not just a focal point by the environmentalists, but every one of us has a role to play in this. And no matter how small of an impact you're making, it is important to make an impact. Thank you.
Shak, if I can ask you to join the conversation in terms of the practical struggles you had. If I remember correctly, about 40,000 objections have gone to the government of Selangor on the North Kuala Langat Forest Reserve degazetting initiative. But it's not clear that they will take heed of those 40,000 objections. We already heard statements of the sort. So what is for you the challenge? Is it persuading others that your cultural rights or the forests need to be preserved? Going back to what Alison says, this is a cultural crisis as much as it is about climate. What is it that you see you need to do, and who are your allies in this fight? You have to unmute yourself, I think.
Sorry. At the moment, we have quite a number of NGO being put together as a coalition to protect this Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve, and with that, we working together now, try to bring this case to the court to stop the Selangor government to degazette our forest reserve near my village, actually near my parent house, just behind my parent house. So this is it's very urgent, because for some reason the Selangor government doesn't even acknowledge the indigenous people who live there, and it's totally clearly a violate to indigenous rights, and also violate to human rights. I think this is quite shameful how that government is supposed to be a person who govern for the people, but instead they govern to enrich their private company, and this is totally not right. And that the urgency comes from that. Do we really want to set a really bad example to the whole community, especially to international, that you actually willing to violate the human right and indigenous right, and also try to undermine the right of indigenous people, and that's actually, it's really not good way to set example for. And also as indigenous people, as a first people of this country, I think we have a right to stand for our right, because this forest, for example, is very crucial to indigenous people in Selangor, because Selangor is a state where the massively overdeveloped already. I think we don't need any more mixed development that they actually try to plan to degazette this 927 hectare of a forest reserve, virgin forest reserve, into mixed development. That's because that is mind blowing for me. And also because this forest is a peat forest is very crucial to our climate change, because the peat forest is actually almost like a sponge for our carbon that we release in our atmosphere, and CO2 actually been sucked to this forest reserve, to this peat forest. If we degazette or deforest it, means this carbon will release to atmosphere. They will affect to not just Malaysia, but the whole country, the whole planet, because this is urgent issue that me and my friends together try to stop the Selangor government, and with this ridiculous idea to destroy the environment.
Yeah, if I can ask Wendy to join us in this particular, because I know the Borneo state, Sabah and Sarawak, the territories of Sabah and Sarawak have had their challenges in terms of the environment, and also long struggles over big dams, for instance. Wendy, what lessons can you bring to the table from your part of Malaysia that maybe can help inform this struggle?
The struggle of the cultural identity, and together,
and also the preservation of the environment and cultural identities as they're intertwined.
They are intertwined, because I was just thinking, like, it's actually like a lot of things crossed my mind when Don was talking about his points of views, and I remember vividly, like, sorry, I probably need to share a story, like, just like a few years ago we went to a village in the inland to build a kindergarten, and so in that inland, like, circumstances, I think, like, a lot of things are actually in a very poor condition. I mean, from someone from the city point of view. Yeah, so we were trying to, like, and we were dealing with the Penang community, like, in terms of, because I would say, like, in terms of the indigenous community in Sarawak and Sabah is probably like more fortunate compared to the one in Peninsular Malaysia, because I've been to both, and I travel inland to both sides of Malaysia, and what I felt about, like, these two sides, I would say, like, the Sarawak indigenous is probably, like, there's more representation in the media, there's more representation like over the in the city area, and actually they are the majority. But when it's come to the Penang community, because there is a certain, like,
oh, we seem to have lost Wendy. Is she frozen?
I think it's frozen.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, we'll try. Oh, sorry, we lost you for a while, Wendy. But yeah, please carry on.
Yeah. So what I felt with the Penang community is, like, they are, like, because we thought we should bring in a certain, like, education set to them to better their living, but what we found is, like, actually there are some things that we should learn from them. Like, for example, they are actually in their most confident state when they are in the jungle, when they are in the forest. Like, I still remember vividly when we were doing a trekking with some of the leader from the community. They were so confident and pointing out like there are some herbs and plants that can cure certain things that we from the city we wouldn't know, like for example malaria and things like, you know, so it's almost like forest is like a museum of herbs and very precious things that like I kind of wish at that point we can have all of them like documented, but we never really had that like facility or chance to really like, you know, spend a long time to do that documentation. But I think like there should be more exchange, like from the urban and suburban area or in the inland area and the city area, and that's what I felt like if because we were doing a very short like film with that journey. And I still remember like one of the leader from the community was saying that like forest doesn't really choose its inhabitants. Like who are we as human to choose our own inhabitants? And I think it's kind of bring in a lot of message, not simply just like socially, but also politically and like in a wider like cosmological like manner. And I felt that like we can learn a lot from them. But at the same time, we're also seeing there is a potential risk that they are like disappearing. Yeah. So this is also something like we are trying to do as well from our side of the platform. Yeah.
Clearly, this is really a big issue that needs much more kind of granular exploration. But there are so many questions now coming through, and I want to sort of pull up those questions from the audience. Also, maybe first by acknowledging some of the questions, some of the raised hands. There's Andy Hickson in the room as well. I think he would like to ask a question.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Sharaad. There has been a few of the panelists, and my question is to all of the panelists, mentioning sustainable development goals. And my question really is, do the panelists think that sustainable development is really sustainable? Or are they a way at best to maintain the status quo? I'm particularly interested in the idea that if we want to stop or help climate change, that we should be looking at more indigenous models of social and ecological regeneration, such as those championed by Shak and other orang asli in Malaysia.
Right, thanks.
So that's open to
thanks, Andy.
everyone.
Great question. Can I ask Eliza if you jump in on this, because the question of, you know, of radical solutions or solutions that mitigate, that tweak, that ameliorate current practices. How do you see this tension? Because I know that clearly that's a major criticism of what is seen as much more conservative approach to addressing climate change.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we really need to question what we understand as what sustainability means. And you can have many different definitions of that word, whether it's environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, economically sustainable. And I think it's kind of unique to each scenario, whether sustainability is something in the short term or in the long term. And it's about kind of understanding all of your stakeholders and finding the sustainability that works best in that specific scenario. So it's a hard question to answer kind of overall, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Does anybody else like to jump in on that? Yes, Shak, tell us, what's your sense of sustainability? What does that mean to you?
Well, you know, I kind of feel tickle me because there's so many development projects. They always often using sustainable development, which is one of few example company I like to mention here is Gamodakov. Gamodakov is building the theme park just next door to this Kolonengat North Forest Reserve. Basically, they deforest this jungle already, the forest, and suddenly they put a park. They build a imported plant and on top there, and then saying that this is sustainable development. This is like a greenwashing. You see, it's like they try to cover up their dirty work. I think that's practice should be shameful. I think the architecture need to be aware about the so-called green or sustainable development, because sometimes you're thinking you're doing the good thing, but suddenly you actually done the damage already by killing so many animals, and then.
Yeah, absolutely. The contradictions are staring us in the face. Don would like to respond to that.
Hello, can you guys hear? All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
So, speaking about sustainable, especially related to the SDG, there's 17 goals. There's literally 17 goals. You see, I could be an organization, clear up a forest, build a hotel or resort or whatever, and just employ local and say, hey, we just achieved to employ local, 100% local. I've just covered 1 or 2 SDG goals over there. So the thing, it's just like, I mean, like just like what Lisa said, it's unique to its own scenario, but the way I would emphasize, we have to start somewhere, right? So how to do it is having a sustainable goal approach doesn't mean the structure is rigid now and forever. We have to start somewhere right now, and of course, for example, like if we're working in my community, we have to give and take in certain issues, like probably we should focus more on empowering them, give them alternative livelihood, at the same time do conservation. So at the same time, in 5 years in the future, we realize, hey, they're empowered, hey, they could sustain. Now let's empower them to protect more on the conservation. So throughout the time of throughout the plan of 5 years or 10 years in the future, ideally, even though we're not at the ideal situation in year 1, we hope our vision in 10 years or 5 years in the future, we move towards that direction of an ideal sustainable development concept that we wanted, right? So of course, SDG have been a long discussion of, greenwashing and manipulative and so on, but it's about starting somewhere and really taking account of cultural sensitivity, cultural need, social need, economic need, and so on.
Okay, so there's a question that's come about education, but there's also another person raised their hand, that is Laura. I wonder if we have Laura to ask very quickly your question, because we're running out of time now, unfortunately. Is Laura in the room? If not, could we have somebody address the question of how educational institutions can equip young people clearly with the vocabulary, would be able to, with the conceptual tools to understand these issues? Anybody who like to address the question of educational institutions in the fight for both cultural rights and against climate change?
I have a few things I could say on that, as I am currently. So I'm currently an MA student at Central St Martin's, studying material futures, which I think is a great example of a way a course is struggling with these challenges very well. But I can kind of go back to when I was a fashion BA student, and what I realized I didn't have was more awareness in material choices, and that we had no understanding of the impact, and we were really driven in this kind of old model of quality of material over quality. Like we were never challenged to really look into production, how something was produced beyond the moment that we bought it. And that world was kind of closed off to us. And I think the way education can really change is to get people to look at, especially arts education, can get people to really understand the implications of all of their materials. Like painting is another example where painters might be painting scenarios that challenge our perception of climate change, but they have no awareness of where their paints come from and the materials that go into making their canvases. And for me, I think this is really, really important to move forward. We can't just be talking about the problem, we have to be embodying it in every single thing that we do. And I also think more kind of empowering interdisciplinary collaboration between students and scientists, and empowering students to helping them make those connections and making it feel like it's not a world beyond them that they can't connect with. Thank you.
Well, speaking of connections, I see a lot of people trying to connect on the chat function as well. So if you want to offer yourself or make links, I mean, please go ahead, use the chat function for that. We have about 4 minutes before we go to Jazreel Go, who's the director of the British Council Malaysia, for closing remarks and also the announcement of the grant winners. Does anybody have a kind of closing statement? If I could bring Joy or Alison back into this conversation. You know, Alison, you said something about wanting to be 30 years younger, but I think the wisdom that your struggles give you are really valuable to this next generation, and Joy as well. I mean, this generation of activists going to be standing on your shoulders.
And I'm sure they will be. I mean, you know, I think I'm also standing on theirs. I think this last point that is about how we are supporting younger people through our education, through our training, is really profound, really important. The education system, I think, generally at the moment is as broken as the economic system, because it's built on a set of values that really are completely unfit for purpose. We need to rewrite our curriculums and our skills ideas completely, so that we actually have a much more accurate view of history and of heritage. We are celebrating and valorizing the protectors of this world, who are deeply connected to the land, and so that we can really understand how we steward our future, and the skills, the professions, the support, the investment that goes into our younger people now, in order to steward us to a much better equitable future. And I think this really does go to the heart of it. What we've heard today from this incredible group, and I'm sure there are many people in the chat who are in this space as well, is that the answers are all there and everybody is doing their bit. But the structures, the legal, the financial, the education, the governance frameworks really need to catch up. And that's what it is. It's catching up. In order to take on this radical transformative future that we have.
Yeah.
So, Joy, can I ask?
Yes, very quickly, Sharaad, just to to share that the IPCC has actually reviewed over 2,000 scientific literature on the SDG, all 17 goals, and there are more benefits than trade-offs in taking climate actions to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So nothing is taken away from sustainable development goal by taking climate actions. And again, my message to the youth, this world is your world. You drive the change that you want. Thank you.
There's so much, Joy, and right on time. So now we go to the final part of this afternoon session. There's still 120 of you in the room, so thank you very much for staying with us. I'd like to invite Jazreel Go. She's the director of the British Council Malaysia, to announce the grant winners of the A.R.C. Challenge, the Awareness, Resilience, and Collaboration Challenge. And after that, we'll have the, that look at sketch post and what it's captured of this conversation.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, it's really a great pleasure to conclude this event. And I would like to thank all our guests who have generously spent the last 1.5 hours with us, sharing your time, expertise to make this event meaningful and insightful. And specifically to His Excellency Charles Hay, Professor Joy Jacqueline Pereira, Alison Tickell, and all our panelists and youth representatives. Thank you so much. The British Council, as the UK's international cultural organisation, really will continue to bring awareness around climate change issues with more activities leading to COP26 and beyond. Our aim is really to increase young people's access to dialogues and debates on climate change, taking dialogues beyond the typical climate change circles and helping global leaders and policymakers understand the needs and concerns of young people. So in addition, the British Council, I have a really good news here, has also recently launched a scholarship program in partnership with UK universities aimed at female STEM graduates from Southeast Asia to study a master's degree in the UK. I think this is a really timely and relevant scholarship, and energy and transition climate change is one of the eligible program areas for this scholarship. So I do hope that there will be applicants who take this up from Malaysia. And I invite you to follow us on our social media channels to find out more about the scholarship and to join us in our programs across art, science and education in the lead up to COP26. And now I think it's the moment you have all been waiting for. It is now time for me to announce the 3 winners of the Awareness, Resilience and Collaboration Challenge Grant Program. We believe that these 3 words stand at the heart of the solutions against climate change. And we believe that the youth has the power to change and improve our current system, and that collaborations across sectors and cultures will play a crucial role in tackling climate change. We received a total of 25 applications through this challenge seed funding program. Really proud to see the enthusiasm and the quality of the projects submitted to us by the youth of both UK and Malaysia. All the applications were truly exciting and explored promising ideas. Some were technical and scientific, some were a little bit more artistic and creative. So really thank you all for all your extremely high quality submissions. You are all winners in my opinion. And so now the 3 projects that were shortlisted by the panelists to receive seed funding to take forward their ideas are: the first one, Ripple, Responsible Innovation Plastics Projects for Life and Environment. This is a collaboration between BGBG Initiative in Malaysia and Falmouth University, and it involves circular economy, design, advocacy, and training for youth around the theme of upcycling. The second one is Weaving Hopes for the Future, a collaboration between Klima Action Malaysia and Students for Global Health from the UK. This project is rooted in the principles of education, advocacy, and empowerment for climate change, as well as enhancing appreciation of the creative arts from the indigenous community. And finally, Visioning the Future and Storytelling for Climate Change, which is a collaboration between Neo1 Associates from Malaysia and Social Enterprise Academy International CIC in Scotland. And this project is about empowering young people to create collaborative projects related to climate change and to showcase this through the medium of storytelling through a virtual global impact festival. So congratulations to our winners. But what's next? Well, on the 25th of March, we will be hosting a pitching session for these 3 teams to present their projects to an audience of funders and policymakers, as well as academics. We hope that they will gain insightful feedback, recommendation, and also, who knows, additional funding to scale up their collaborations during the session. So do join us on the 25th of March at 4:30 p.m. for another exciting phase of the A.R.C. challenge. And thank you, everyone. This is a really exciting time for us, UK hosting COP26, but more importantly, for us to be able to stimulate more collaborations between UK and Malaysia. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution today. And I hope that this continues and is the start of a long journey collaborating together. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jezreel. As the traffic noise sort of imposes itself on us. We had to draw the session to a close with so many interesting ideas. Sorry, we couldn't pick everything up, but remember, you can come back on the 25th of March for more conversation and a deeper sense of how we make these connections. We'll now show you what Sketchpost has put together in terms of making visual the conversations that we had over the last an hour and a half. So Thank you so much, Sketchpost. I think it's going to take a bit of time to load up. There it is. Okay, wonderful. So I'd like to thank everybody for their participation in today's proceedings, from His Excellency to Florence Lambert with the British Council, and of course the panelists, is a wonderful panelist that gives us hope for the future. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, by the way, and it was great meeting you. There is a feedback form. There'll be a QR code flash at some point in time, but if you missed that, there's also going to be an email in which you'll have links to to give your feedback on today's event. So please do that. It'll really help the British Council make the next experience much more pleasant and rewarding and consequential. So I'd like to thank everybody and have a great day.